Good evening, everyone. If we can go ahead and have everyone get seated, we're going to get started in just a minute. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shannon Jones. I am the Criminal Justice Chair for the Newport News NAACP. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Voices for Justice, our Criminal Justice Forum. To kick things off today, we are going to begin by welcoming Pastor Swann from Ivy Baptist Church to give us greetings.
Good evening, everybody. We want to welcome you tonight to Ivy, to this important forum. To those who are watching online as well, we thank you for tuning in. I think we all recognize the significance and importance of this subject. I want to thank the elected officials that are here tonight. Thank you to the Newport News branch of the NAACP, to Shannon Jones, and to our social justice ministry here at Ivy that has partnered to do this event. We recognize again that it's good to have these conversations, and I guess my hope tonight is that after we have conversations and after we have been stirred emotionally, that it will lead us to action. And so that is my hope for tonight. So again, welcome, we thank you, and we hope that you enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Swann, for having us here. Next, I'd like to welcome our president of the Newport News NAACP, Ms. Jennifer Brooks, for greetings.
Hello? Okay, thank you. There we go. Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Burgess Brooks, and I bring you greetings from the Newport News NAACP. Listen, it is so good to be here on tonight, but more than that, it's good to see all of you here on tonight. Give yourselves a hand. This is a powerful, powerful forum that we have for you tonight. And so you're going to hear a lot of great information. We have a dynamic panel behind me. You're going to hear the story of Kimba Smith, which is a powerful story. Powerful, powerful story. You're going to learn about criminal justice on tonight. And so pat yourselves on the back for coming out to want to take care of your city, for coming out to be a part of this discussion about criminal justice. A lot of you don't know, but the Newport News NAACP, the NAACP as a whole, we have a criminal justice committee. We have 20 different ways that you can get involved with the NAACP, and this is one of them. And so we're excited about this. We're excited to bring this information to you so that you can learn more knowledge about criminal justice. Okay? So we're really excited about this, and we thank you for coming. If you have questions as you're listening to our panelists on the night, please hold on to your questions because we're going to have a Q&A time a little later in this session. So I also wanted to remind you all that the NAACP is nonpartisan, so we're not Democratic, we're not Republican, we are just nonpartisan, and we're here to fight for advocacy, to remove disparities, we're here to fight social justice, and we're here to advocate for our city and for our country. And so that's what the NAACP is about. That's what we do. So give it up. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over. I just want to thank Ivy Baptist, too. I want to thank you all for collaborating with the Newport News NAACP and the Social Justice Committee. Erica, we thank you all. You will hear from her a little bit later. And I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you so much, President Brooks. All right, so first and foremost, we have some amazing people here in the room with us. And just to be clear, everybody who showed up today is amazing. So I really appreciate you all for being here. But I do want to take an opportunity just to recognize our elected officials. So first and foremost, Mayor Philip Jones is in the house, y'all. Let's give him a round of applause. And our First Lady, Dr. Winter. We also have our Chief of Police, Steve Drew, here. Our Commonwealth's Attorney, Howard Gwynn, is here. From the school board, we've got Dr. Terry Best. Also from the school board, Maritza Alger. From the Hampton NAACP, President Galen Knoyton. We've got Delegate Shelley Simons here. And I'm going to recognize our panelists, but I think that was all of our elected officials. Did I miss anyone? All right, so one of the most important things that I want to stress for you all today is that Newport News NAACP is one of the largest civil rights organizations we have here, and membership is our lifeblood. So as you guys walked in, there was a membership table. If you are not a member, I encourage you all to join the NAACP. One of the things that we say about our organization is that it is the largest and the oldest, the baddest and the boldest, the most loved, the most hated, feared and revered, cussed and discussed civil rights organization. And we've been doing this work for over 116 years, so I encourage every single person in here to make sure you stop at that table and you take an opportunity to join our organization. All right, now for our amazing panel. First and foremost, I am so excited that we have Miss Kimba Smith here. Can we give her a round of applause? You guys are going to learn a little bit more about her story, but she really is a true advocate for criminal justice reform, and it's such an honor to have her here. Second, we have our Congressman Bobby Scott. One of the hardest working people in our Congress right now. Coming from Southside, we have Ramin Fadahi, the Norfolk Commonwealth's Attorney. And then Professor at Hampton University of Sociology, Dr. Zena McGee. So today we're going to be talking about criminal justice reform, and Kimba Smith's story is a major part of that. So to kick things off, we are going to have a video that gives you an overview about Kimba's story. So I'll turn it over to the media.
LDF was already on this, but it wasn't in a time where criminal justice was the thing. I didn't feel like I could go to my parents. I didn't feel like I could go to authorities, especially after he killed his best friend. I was his girlfriend. I wasn't knowledgeable of his business dealings. I was no threat to public safety. Being pregnant while incarcerated and not being able to physically touch, hold, smell, feel him after I gave birth to him is something, a trauma that is kind of indescribable.
This issue transcends poverty. You know, it transcends orders and community. You can be middle class as you want to be. home paid for, 10 bedrooms or whatever, and have your child be in the same position Kimber was in. We know that there are serious issues here, but we also know we can make a difference.
The perfect plaintiff can help us see race more clearly, because it shows that even when you have the perfect life, when you have the two-parent household, when you have the middle-class upbringing, the economic wherewithal, you can still wind up in the crosshairs of the criminal justice system.
All right. So each member here on our panel plays a different but a key role in criminal justice. So just to start us off, I'd like for each of you just to tell us a little bit about what motivates you to do this work, and of course tell us how you kind of got involved. So if we can start off with you, Ms. Smith.
Testing 1, 2. Okay, I'm going to try to be as brief as I can be as far as what motivates me, because there's several things. I can't be in Ivy Baptist Church and not acknowledge the fact that God, I tell people, be careful what you pray for, because when I got on my knees and prayed and asked God to allow me to be a voice to prevent another person from going down the same path, and I was 7 months pregnant, didn't know what my future was going to be, and I got sentenced to 24 and a half years at 23 years old. Once those prison doors opened, and it took a great deal of a movement when there was no social media, and there were people on the ground such as Miss Joni Ivy. I have to say her name out loud. I thank her for her dedication, but I mean, there are several people who were on the ground that advocated for me, and you know, LDF, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Deltas, the Links, Congressman Scott. So when those prison doors opened, I was grateful for all of the support that I had received, but at the same time, I knew that the issue was bigger than me, and the reason why LDF got involved was because the fastest growing population within prison at the time were Black women. And so, you know, I felt like I was privileged to have all of this support, but yet when I was in federal prison, I knew that not everybody has a congressman that's a champion on these issues advocating for them, or national organizations. So I wanted to continue to be a human face for those that I left behind in federal prison. And so, and then I can't be remiss in, you know, my parents, mom and dad, if you could stand, please. You know, today I'm telling my age, but I'm 53 years old. And at the time, my parents were in their 50s raising my son that I gave birth to, and they were traveling across the country talking about their daughter and incarceration, where, you know, we're in the church. There's some people in the church that's scared to share with their community members about a loved one that's locked up because they're ashamed of, you know, how people may talk about them. My mom was a former retired educator. She is a retired educator, but she was a high school teacher at the time. My dad, an accountant. And they went across the country nationally advocating for me. And so when I came out, they motivated me. Because once I came out, people wanted to hear the story from me. And so I'm grateful for their leadership. And lastly, because again, I'm being a little long-winded, learning my history and culture while I was in prison. I mean, you all know I went to Hampton University for 3 years, and yes, to the Hampton folks in the room. But I grew up in predominantly white schools, and so when I was in prison, that's when I learned about our history, culture. I learned how to be resilient from the slave narratives and the sacrifice. It made me minimize my own sense of injustice and look at the full picture. So coming out, I wanted to continue to carry the torch and trying to help free others and prevent other young people from going down the same path.
you so much. So, Congressman Scott, now you've been doing the work since day one, since you've been elected. Tell us what drives you to continue to fight for criminal justice reform.
Well, first of all, let me thank the NAACP, and as a former branch president, I can tell you the branch works best when you work through committees, and when you have a social justice committee having forums like this, the branch really works well, and look forward to forums like this and the Housing Committee, the Education Committee, the Health Committee, and everything else, so we can discuss all of the issues. It's a pleasure to be here with Kimba and Attorney Fadahi and Dr. McGee. But this and Gus and Odessa Smith, who, you know, Kimba said I worked on a case. Let me tell you, they worked on me. They were always there for her daughter and never let me forget. And so we were successful in lobbying President Clinton for the commutation. But criminal justice reform is an easy issue. After you have made the choice, whether you're playing politics with slogans and sound bites, or reducing crime and saving money, following the evidence and research. After you have made that decision, the rest is easy. Regrettably, most of the people are playing politics with slogans and sound bites, and you've seen it big time recently. You know, the guy that's in El Salvador, they're trying to get him back. They're actually making the case now by having a lady show up at the White House, tell the story about her daughter who was murdered by an undocumented person. And from that, I guess we're supposed to, the logic is, since her daughter was murdered by an undocumented person, totally unrelated to this case, therefore, the guy in El Salvador isn't entitled to due process. And let me tell you, they're making progress politically on that, because you got a guy who is undesirable against a person who's, you'd want to be on that side of that argument. So politics and crime actually works. And so stupid stuff, slogans and sound bites can help politicians get elected, but the problem with it is, after a while, all you've done is loaded up the prisons and you haven't done anything about crime. And so it's forums like this that can certainly make the difference and get us back on track. And over the years, it's been the same thing. Very easy. Just make the decision, what you're doing, and the policy follows. It's forums like this that will make it a lot easier for politicians to follow the evidence and research.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Fadahi, so you are the Commonwealth's attorney in Norfolk, which is the chief prosecutor. Tell us why, in your position, you are motivated to do criminal justice reform.
I do it because it's my calling. I'm the son of an immigrant on one side and the son of someone who traces her family back to the 19th century on the other. And I believe that we are all God's children, that we don't choose whether to be rich or poor, whether to be white or black, whether to have good parents or no parents, and that we are fortunate to be Americans, that we should be patriotic about our ideals, but deeply critical about the execution of those ideals over the course of the last 250 years. And that when America does what it says it's going to do, it becomes a place we can be proud of. The justice system is one of the chief places where we have seen high ideals and an absolute betrayal of those ideals, where there was selective non-prosecution for the privileged, for the connected, for the wealthy, and where, as one of my fellow DAs in Kansas City says, where black, brown, and broke people did not get the same kind of deal. That is deeply morally offensive, and it is a moral issue. Well, everything Congressman Scott said and everything Kemba has said is correct. If you follow the logic, criminal justice reform works. It saves us money. It makes us safer. It increases trust in the justice system. It actually increases the police's ability to make arrests because people will talk to them, and prosecutors' abilities to hold violent people accountable. But for me, it's like arguments when people argue over the death penalty. You know, oh, it's inadequate, or it's inequitably imposed. It's more basic. Is it moral or is it not? And it is immoral to treat people unfairly, to sacrifice them for rhetoric, to overpunish them and take them out of their families. No, it is an affront to who we are as human beings. And that is why I feel so passionately about this work, and why even in a world where the forces that are against criminal justice reform are on the march, I will not yield, is because it's not a matter of political expediency. It's a matter of, you know, when St. Peter opens the roll, I want to be able to say that I did what I could to make sure that our ideals weren't empty words. That's why I do what I do.
Thank you so much. All right. So, Dr. McGee, you doing this work at the higher education level, you've committed a lot of research on these subjects. Tell us why you're interested in these issues.
I have an interest in it because the research, and my hope is that I can use that research to give a voice to those whose voices have been silenced. For far too long, we see that so many of our community members are marginalized on the basis of race, social class, age, LGBTQ plus status, gender, disability status. And the problem is that for many, we are dealing with a system that continues to separate the families, separate mothers from their children, separate children from their mothers and fathers. And we don't fully understand that many of those children are facing limited life chances because of the incarceration of their parents. When the parents are released from prison, there's the expectation that they will be re-socialized and become re-socialized in a society that will accept them. But what we instead find is many of them face labeling, they face stigmatization, and they also face limited resources, which is going to serve as an impediment to the life chances of their children. Not being able to find affordable housing, for example, not being able to gain adequate education or an income, not being able to be a part of family reunification programs that will allow them to heal. Because many of the individuals who come out of our system have faced traumatic victimization even prior to incarceration. But yet we continue to see this cycle repeat itself. It's known as recidivism, where we see so many repeat offenders returning to jail. Part of that has to do with the fact that we as a society have not provided them with the adequate resources that they have. And what we have provided them with, we've done it in such a way that they are forced to feel the shame of incarceration, when many of them are unjustly brought into that system and not treated as human beings. It's the dehumanization of what we see, as well as mass incarceration and the separation of those families.
Thank you so much. So since the 1990s, we have had freedom fighters like Congressman Scott fighting to eliminate mandatory minimums. And it's stories like Kemba that really show the impact of what mandatory minimums do on individuals in our systems. So turning to Kemba, your story really highlights the impact of mandatory minimums. Can you just share with us a little bit about what people need to understand about the consequences of their actions and how we should approach sentencing reform?
Well, for those of you all in the audience that may not know, basically I was sentenced as a first-time nonviolent drug offender to 294 months in federal prison. And basically, the prosecutor, which oftentimes has more power than the judges, basically determined how much drug weight that they were going to hold me accountable for. And so I basically signed a plea agreement. There's a whole story that goes along with that, but I'm not going to take up the whole time with trying to talk about that. But in me signing the plea agreement, basically, the judge wasn't able to sentence me outside of a sentencing guideline, even though the prosecutor said I didn't handle, use, or sell any of the drugs that were involved. the judges at that time hand was forced to sentence me to 24 and a half years based on the sentencing guideline. But there was an exception where he could have considered mitigating circumstances. And this is one of the things as far as consequences to mandatory minimum sentencing and why there needs to be sentencing reform, because there was expert testimony with regard to the domestic violence and abuse, because basically I got involved with a drug dealer who was abusive. There was expert testimony from 2 witnesses that stated, information, research about the abuse and how it impacted my behavior. But my 86-year-old judge at the time basically was sleeping during this expert testimony. And so what I do feel as if with sentencing reform, and even though, I had the path of going to college, my parents providing the best for me, I went wayward and went down this path of thinking that I was in love and made some poor choices that I've been very transparent about. But the fact that I was 23 years old and the judge wanted to sentence me to 24 and a half years and didn't look at the mitigating circumstances of me being in an abusive relationship. And I feel as if, in particular with women, we know that the majority of the women that are in our prisons and jails across the country have experienced some form of trauma, and oftentimes judges don't look at that. I have a friend that I heard speak for the first time where she shared her story, and basically she was trafficked from Jamaica to the United States and was abused throughout her childhood, and she bounced from house to house and dealt with, a drug dealer trying to take care of her, but she ended up going down this path to incarceration. Oftentimes, judges don't look at that. And oftentimes, even as my experience as being a parole board member, is that oftentimes some of our youth that get caught up in our system, and we have the United States Supreme Court with U.S. versus Miller basically saying that it's unconstitutional to sentence a young person to life in prison because their brains aren't fully developed yet. But oftentimes they're young people that haven't even had a first chance, much less a second chance. So that's why I feel like it's very important when we talk about sentencing reform, because one of the things that, as you talk about, this isn't about politics, this is about human lives and families being impacted, is that we have to be on the ground in our communities. And during election time, they want to talk about, criminals, rapists, and various things to place fear within our communities. But we need to, as community leaders, as church leaders, as social justice ministry, we need to be highlighting success stories. With this being Second Chance Month, I have to say this, I'm grateful that I'm able to sit on this panel, but there are other formerly incarcerated people in the state of Virginia across the country that are leading criminal justice reform. We need to, number one, break down this barrier, this misconception of making people fear people that are in prison or people that are coming out of prison. Most people want to do better, but we also need to make sure that there are resources and opportunities for people once they come out of prison. The number one problem with being on the parole board was some people, I'm grateful I had my parents where I had a roof over my head, but some people struggle with housing, so it's jobs. We just need enough resources. And I know I'm going past the sentencing reform, but it's frustrating, Congressman Scott, to go to different states such as, and I'm not saying we're doing everything wrong, because we're not, but to go in different states that are red states that are more progressive and doing more things on a state level. I was just in Ohio, and the type of programming that they have within the prisons, I was told that the Virginia Department of Corrections had shadowed some of their programmings there, but I would love to see some of these opportunities, because if our people can get training and education within our prison systems, then there's more opportunity for them once they come out where they won't recidivate. But if we want to dehumanize people, not give them the resources, prevent them from being able to visit their families by having staff members that work at these prisons that harass family members that try to come visit their family members to make them not want to come back, not want to make the distance. We need to, number one, treat people as human. And lastly, in our education as a community, as the public, we need to get rid of the language of ex-felon, ex-convict, prisoner. We need to understand that people are human first. I was a daughter first. I was a mother first. That you need to address this incarcerated person as a person and not label them, because that's where some of the shame and negative connotations come from.
Thank you so much. All right, so Congressman Scott, you have been fighting the good fight for quite some time, and you've done so much at the federal level. But tell us, what additional steps need to be taken to address the mass incarceration that we're seeing here in our country?
Well, first of all, I think people have to really understand what mandatory minimum means. It means if someone comes before and is convicted of violating a code section, they get as a minimum, mandatory, no discretion on the judge, a certain sentence. If it makes sense, the judge can impose the sentence, and if it makes no sense, the judge has to impose that as a minimum anyway. I mean, just ask yourself, in Kimba's case, low level, really not really part of the drug conspiracy. You might find, okay, took a message, delivered something or something. Certainly no part of the major operation. First offense, 24.5 years, more than robbers and rapists and murderers get. What, does that make any sense? But the judge had, as she said, no discretion, because that's what the code section said. And the idea that you're going to do any good by increasing sentences to the absurd, just think it out. For a low-level amount of crack, about a weekend's worth of crack at that time, 5 years mandatory minimum. You got caught with a weekend's worth of crack, 5 years mandatory minimum. Same amount, weekend's worth of powder cocaine, probation. Now, before you get to the racial disparity, just think, how many people do you know ever said, oh, I don't touch the crack anymore, I stick to the powder? Because I can get 5 years mandatory on the crack, I can get probation for the, but no, they're going to do what they want to do. So that extra 5 years you've tacked on is just a waste of money. It doesn't do any deterrence, it just wastes money, and that's what you're talking about. The kind of things that, programs that Kimba mentioned, exactly the kind of programs, education programs. That's why a couple of years ago I was the lead person who restored Pell Grants for prisoners. So the community colleges can come in and they can come out with more credentials than they went in. But you want to know what can be done? First thing you got to do is get rid of the slogans. 3 strikes and you're out. If you do the adult crime, you do the adult time. Oh, that one's been studied. It actually increases crime. Mandatory minimums, death sentences, and put them to death quicker without appeals. This thing on the death penalty had gotten so bad at one time that the court actually ruled, when someone said they were factually innocent, the court actually ruled that factual innocence is not a defense to the death penalty. If you are alleging you didn't get a fair trial, they'll hear that. But just because you think you're innocent, they don't want to hear it. That's how ridiculous some of these slogans get you. And so we have to, if you're going to do anything about sentencing, you have to get rid of the slogans and get to the point where you're actually doing something about crime. All those slogans have gotten us as mass incarceration. We lock up a higher portion of our population than any country on earth by far, and get nothing for it. And one of the problems we got is we lock people up without, one thing that is never considered in weighing whether you can do it or not, how much does it cost? They had this little scheme in Richmond where they call it Project Exile. You take state prisoners who might get a year or two and stick them in federal court where they had a 5-year mandatory minimum. And so those people would be getting 3 or 4 extra years because of Project Exile. And you could see some of the people behind that strutting around like peacocks because the crime rate went down 25%. What they got a little embarrassed is in Norfolk and Chesapeake and in a couple of other cities, crime rate went down more than that, and they didn't even have Project Exile. But one thing, so you don't even know whether it works or not, and you're debating it back and forth, but nobody ever comes up with, well, how much does it cost? And what else could you have done with that money? How much, every time you send somebody on Project Exile, you're spending an extra $100,000 or $200,000. What could the Boys and Girls Club have done with that money? Keeping people out of trouble to begin with, actually reducing crime. And so what we need to do is get rid of the slogans and sound bites, get back to the evidence and research, and intelligently reduce crime, and in the process save money and make us safer.
All right. So, Mr. Fadahi, you are the elected Commonwealth Attorney in Norfolk. It is your responsibility to keep your citizens safe, but you're also a proponent for criminal justice reform. So how do you drive justice and reform at the same time as focusing on public safety?
It's easy. They're complementary values, as Congressman Scott has said. If locking people up and locking people up for a long time would make us safe, we'd be Singapore. We'd have no crime. It does not. As Dr. McGee pointed out, when we rend families without good reason, and we take fathers out of the community, we destabilize people's home lives, that is what is criminogenic. It produces crime to do that. We live in a world where not everybody is going to obey the law, and where people who commit violence against other people will need to have trials, and they will need to go to prison. But they should go for the amount of time that is necessary for public safety, to protect other people. And that should not be a slogans and sound bites decision. It should be a data-driven decision, one where we do not dehumanize the individuals with the language we use, and we don't make examples of them because it is immoral and unjust. As a progressive and as a criminal justice reformer, I believe that my job and my lawyer's job, there are 40 of us in my office, is to focus on people who commit violent crime. And we can make a real difference in the lives of the family of victims of violent crime and of the victims themselves, and in the lives of the families of the accused and the accused him or herself, and in our communities, by being procedurally just, by being transparent, by being fair, and by saying we do not do this out of anger, but we do this out of data. Now, criminal justice reform supports that goal. In the United States today, for every 100 murders, only 60 people are ever arrested. Ooh, the other 40 are walking around. And part of that, a large part, is people say, I don't trust this system. It has not delivered justice for me. It's not delivered justice in my community. Come to Norfolk and let me show you my homicide map and my redlining map. They are the same map. So the people who say, I don't trust the system, aren't talking crazy. They are looking at the data. And when we say we want to be driven by data, we do not want to be driven by the worst angels of our nature. We are reaching out a hand to the people who are distrustful of the system and who therefore are at risk of committing violence. And we say we want to do this together. And if we are able to do that, then maybe we have some effect on the overall crime rate. But what we do is say no, we don't need 5 years where one will do, because in Norfolk it costs $40,000 a year to put somebody in the jail, $60,000 a year in the Department of Corrections. It's unnecessary. No, the word felon is very seductive to a certain sort of person, and they like to refer to people as felons. What if you said, we would like to impose a civil death sentence on someone, or we want to make them unemployable. I took somebody and made them unemployable today, because that is what we do. Where we have to and where public safety demands it, that's one thing. Where it doesn't demand it, we are harming our communities and making it more likely that more people will be in jail or prison. Criminal justice reform makes us safer. It is easy and seductive to make the contrary argument. People say when you're explaining, you're losing, and unfortunately in a lot of criminology we have to explain. But when you look at the data, when you look at what works, the things that we do are the things that make for safer communities. And in addition to safety, it delivers justice, it delivers equality, it delivers moral clarity, and it helps us be more of who our Constitution and laws say we are supposed to be.
Thank you. All right, Dr. McGee, so for generations, we have been talking about the school to prison pipeline, and we see so many young people under the age of 25, like Kimba, who are entering into our system. So what are some effective strategies for keeping young people out of the criminal justice system?
Thank you. One of the things we have to do is take a close look at what that school to prison pipeline really means, and we've got to shift our ideology, our way of thinking. How many times do we see young men, young women, children, adolescents being pushed out of school into the juvenile justice system, some of them even being waived into adult court? When we do that, we've taken away their greatest asset, and that's their education, their ability to learn, their ability to understand, communicate, socialize with others. We instead look at those young people in many classrooms and we see them as rebellious, defiant, which some of them may be. But for many marginalized girls, for example, marginalized boys, those who may suffer from victimization in homes, in communities, those who may suffer from poverty, those who may be in situations where their parents have been victimized, or they're living with what we call that feminization of poverty, where many of the mothers are their heads of the households. Part of the problem there is that those children are often misunderstood. We see that in terms of the manner in which we relate to them, adultification as it's known, where we don't necessarily see their responses to adversity as inquiry. It's more or less as resistance. And so we place this label on them very early on. We've taken away their greatest asset, that of education. Now, as we start to think about DEI, think about what that really means, because many children in our schools are developmentally disabled. Many of those children are in need of more resources. The more that we take from those children in those settings, the more likely we are going to see those children start to internalize the negative labels that are often placed on them as failures, inability to learn, and we're going to see the victimization and the violence, that cycle take shape. And so that school to prison pipeline tells us quite a bit about what needs to be done. We've got to change the ideology, first of all. And we also understand that we cannot dismantle the system just as it is, but we also have to be able to understand what that means. The fact that we have so many young people being pushed out of schools into this system, the fact that we have so many families being separated, many of the mothers, for example, who are in prison, many of them are long-time jail inmates where they're sitting and they're awaiting trials. These mothers are separated from their children. When mothers go away to prison, the children they don't understand. Many of them are confused. They may act out in behavioral ways. But the problem is that we don't fully understand that many of those women who've gone into the system, some have escaped abusive situations. Some of them have been using drugs in order to cope with the abusive situations. But there has not been the recognition that these women, for example, are suffering from what we know to be years of traumatic victimization. And so it's the dismantling really of the family is what we're facing. So we have to take a look, first of all, at that ideology and what that means. And we have to understand how powerful that ideology is, because it shapes reform. It shapes many of the punitive policies that we now see. Holding individuals, for example, in prisons and jails for extended period of times when they are nonviolent offenders. That's an example of that. And then what happens when they are released? The expectation is that they will be re-socialized, but they're still facing that negative label, the label of the ex-offender or the label of the convict. And then they face the structural, we call that structural violence, which is an example which would relate more to, let's say, limited housing, limited education, cuts in pay, health care, all of that has much to do with the manner in which the family is going to continue to function, if at all. And that's why we continue to see that cycle repeating itself. We dismiss the importance of programs, for example. They're very important. These programs that reunify families, these programs that provide youth and their families with empowerment. The idea of agency, being able to help those individuals rebuild their lives after incarceration. And so not only must we change that ideology as we realize more about the structural impact of this, we need to also take a close look at the programs and the need for more long-term programs that are going to help the families.
When you speak about the, yes, thank you. When you speak about the programs and prevention of the school to prison pipeline, one of the things that I've experienced in my transparency is, number one, it's been really important through my walk as a formerly incarcerated person to be accountable for the choices that I made. And so in doing that and being transparent about my story, I've gone across this country for the over almost 25 years that I've been home, at high schools, different community events. And in my vulnerability of sharing my trauma, it opens up other young people to think about their trauma and want to do things differently. So it's really important, as I want to reiterate, is that we have forums and spaces where there can be formerly incarcerated voices that can, who transitioned successfully, where they can share their experience, because what I found is that we can be the credible messengers for our young people that are out here dealing with the violence, the trauma in and out of the households, because some of us have been through that trauma. I know there's a brother, Paul Taylor, he has League of Safer Streets, where he's out here on the streets talking to young people, and he's able to connect with them better than probably anyone that he deals with in a school from the day to day. So I would say, to add with some of that programming, to make sure that you include some people who've actually been through some things and have been through the system, and to give them the real deal about you not wanting to go down the same path.
All right, so the next question is about trust. So Kemba, you came into the system at such a young age, and literally became the face of mandatory minimums and criminal justice. First and foremost, did that affect your trust in our system? And if so, what can we do to help restore trust for individuals who have gone through what you have?
I think it didn't make me more distrustful of the system. It made me trust myself more in wanting to be more knowledgeable about the law, and again, holding myself accountable and understanding it's we the people that have to hold our legislatures and decision makers responsible for some of these policies that impact us. So I would say that I wouldn't lean as a community mostly on my trust in the system and the government. I would just need to make sure, instead of watching the 5 o'clock news and, complaining about each and everything in our neighborhood is finding a lane where you can be a part of the change that needs to happen that you want to see. For me, I felt like by me sharing my ordeal, and again, I'm grateful to the NAACP, all the various organizations, because I was a broken woman when I came home, and I was able to heal in sharing my story and being able to see its continued impact. But as far as trust in the system, I was more focused on doing the work in trying to help change the system and continue to be a voice, because I know we need the research, we need the lawyers, but I also believe in the power of storytelling and how stories can change hearts and minds as well.
All right, and then I have one final question, and I'm actually going to start with Dr. McGee on this one. But everyone on the panel has different expertise and a different background. But can you just tell us, in your opinion, what is the most urgent reform or issue that we need to focus on today with respect to criminal justice?
The most urgent reform that we need to focus on is really the disparate sentencing that we see. The idea that so many have gone through the system and are spending inordinate amounts of time in the system for low-level drug offenses. And so there needs to be more. We've got to shift that narrative to focus more on the equity in terms of the system itself.
Mr. Fadahi, what do you think is the most important issue?
Just one?
You can hit us with a couple.
All right, I'll take two. Well, repealing mandatory minimum sentences is one. I mean, one of the greatest powers that prosecutors have is to handcuff judges. Kemba's experience was because some prosecutor thought that was a good idea to do that. And it was a terrible idea. And the transcripts from federal court are full in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s of judges thundering about how unfair it was that the prosecutors did this to them. The ugly secret about mandatories is that if the person deserves more time, the mandatory is irrelevant. They get more time. But if the person deserves less time, they still get more time. And in Virginia, it can't be fixed. There are other states where prosecutors can review excessive sentences, where prosecutors can vacate convictions if they think that the person is innocent. We have no such power in Virginia. We need the General Assembly to give it to us because we don't have it. And a lot of old school prosecutors think that just because we can means that we should. And those are two very different questions. And the time has long since passed to empower judges to be judges, to allow them to make the decisions that we say, we trust you so much that you're never late, your jokes are funny, you get to wear black every day and nobody complains. And if we're willing to do that, to say then it is your job to judge. But the second one I would say has to do with childhood. My phone likes to remind me that I'm aging. So I get the on this day photos. So 2 years ago, I was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I was walking with a group of fellow progressive prosecutors and with a group of people about my age from an organization called Acorn, which included a man I have now gotten to know by the name of Anthony Gomez. And Acorn is the organization for juvenile lifers, people who were sentenced as children to life in prison. And in a brief moment of clarity, the Roberts Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional to sentence children to life without parole. And all of a sudden, these juvenile lifers became eligible for parole. Their recidivism rate is basically zero, because what they did when they were 14 and 15 and 16 was because they were kids and they didn't have their full brain. And I, as Commonwealth's attorney, I get the parole eligibility requests where 30 to 40% of our parole examiners say that people should get parole, and the grant rate's 2%. And I see these juvenile lifers, and there are tons of them still in. The biggest thing we've learned is that we are children till we're 25 when it comes to our brain. And we need to raise the age at which we treat people as adults. We need to restrict the ability of judges and prosecutors to put children in prison because it is not where they belong. And the idea of long confinement is a public safety argument, and it is an absolute farce. And with one exception, I've sent no child to adult prison in my whole term. And that one, I didn't have discretion. But I could have sent 30 or 40 at least. And the accident of somebody having me as their prosecutor and not somebody else should not determine whether they go to prison when they're 16.
Thank you for that. All right, Congressman Scott, he's been doing the work. What else do we have to do?
I'm going to answer these last two questions, building trust and what we can do. First of all, in building trust, the first thing politicians can do is start telling the truth. When you strut around saying you're trying to imply you're doing something about crime by codifying a bunch of slogans and sound bites, that's just dishonest. But there are things you can do. You can follow the evidence, and the evidence shows that rehabilitation works. Investments in rehabilitation, particularly drug rehabilitation, can significantly reduce crime. Early intervention, as people kind of veer off just a little bit, get them right back on track. And prevention. Now, getting people on the right track, keeping them on the right track. Now, I've been working on prevention a long time. When I was in the state Senate, one of the last bills that I sponsored that got actually enacted into law was the establishment of the Virginia Council on Prevention. It required all the agency heads, education, corrections, and everybody to sit around the table and what can we do to prevent problems before they occur. And you have the education saying, well, we'll kick them out of school, and you got corrections right there that said, no, don't kick them out of school. All you've done is given them to us. So you got to deal with it. So what can you do to prevent problems before they occur? Now, nobody here has ever heard of the Virginia Council on Prevention because shortly after that bill became law, I got elected to Congress. I left the General Assembly. There wasn't an advocate for prevention, and that council was abolished. So, and just politically, just a quick word about prevention. If it works, nobody notices. When was the last time somebody gave a standing ovation to the Department of Health because nobody got poisoned at a restaurant? The other is, if it works, it doesn't happen right away, so it doesn't help me in my next election. And finally, the ones paying for the prevention, the city of Newport News, Phil, has a nice juvenile program for summer program, like they did in Chicago, that reduced crime so much that they saved more money than they spent. You don't save any money. The savings goes to the State Department of Corrections, not the local city of Newport News. And so, just from a political point of view, prevention is hard. But we have to make sure in forums like this, I think, can focus attention on getting that done. And that includes things like summer programs for youth. Young people will do something during the summer. If you have nice Little League baseball and all that kind of stuff, they'll be in constructive programs. If you don't have anything, they will find something to do. Many of them will find gangs to join instead of Little League baseball teams. So it's up to us to make sure that they have after-school programs and summer programs, and to provide those opportunities for young people so they can get on the right track and stay on the right track. And so the final thought was what quickly reforms can be done. ending mandatory minimums, and focus not on slogans and sound bites, but prevention and early intervention.
And lastly, I just realized that I've been calling her Kimba throughout this. Now, she told me I could call her Kimba. It was not me being disrespectful. Miss Smith.
Well, I mean, it's actually Pradia now because I'm married. My husband, if he was in the audience, he'll be like, it's Pradia. But
my aunties are going to get me. You were up there calling her by her first name. I apologize.
You're fine, Shannon. You'll make me feel old.
No, but can you just talk a little bit about what work is left for us to do?
Yeah, I would say allowing for transparency. I will say that, you know, again, a lot of fear-mongering can happen. For instance, when I was on the board, there were commercials basically saying how we were corrupt and we were letting murders and rapes, and a lot of people, rapists out of prison, and a lot of people didn't even really understand what the parole board did. And I feel like in other states, board appointments are public. And I think that it would allow for the community to join in on some of these hearings to hear how some of the women and men are in prison and your tax dollars have been spent thousands of dollars to change their behavior in prison, and to see all the programming that they've done, all the support that they have, even some of the time from some of the correctional officers within the prison. But the public doesn't know all of this. So once a person is released, and this goes back to changing the narrative, when that person's released, what is the news reporters, all they want to report on is who that person was when they were 14, 15, 16 years old, instead of who that person has presented themselves to be at these parole board appointments. And so that's one thing, allow for transparency, change the narrative, which I said in Ohio, there was a whole state returning citizen second chance conference. I would love to see something like that go in Virginia, where the Department of Corrections head and different law enforcement and correctional officer staff, I mean, these are who participated in this program that was transformative. And those are the things, and there were a lot of formerly incarcerated people that were there, and I was one, and some others, and while we were there, we even went inside the prison and talked to some of the men and women, and so that also gave the people incarcerated hope to want to continue on their path and journey to having a hopefully one day of light, of freedom. And then lastly, diversifying boards. I'm grateful that the governor of Virginia appointed me to the parole board as not only a formerly incarcerated person, but also I was under a victim because I was a victim of domestic violence. But oftentimes, we don't want to put someone who's formerly incarcerated in certain positions because of their record, but we're the ones that's closest to the problem, so why wouldn't you have us at the table helping to problem solve? So those are some of my suggestions.
Thank you so much. All right, so that's going to conclude the panel portion of this, and we are going to turn to the Q&A. And so I'm going to let our microphone folks get into position. If you all have a question, our panel is here to answer them. They are ready for the questions. They are welcoming them. So we're going to have our folks with the microphones come around. If you want to just raise your hand, and they will come to you if you have a question. But I am going to take a moment just to recognize some of our elected officials who have come in. Want to recognize Dr. Mason from the school board in Hampton. We've got the Vice Mayor of Hampton, Steve Brown, is here. And we've got Hampton City Council, Randy Bowman. All right, and let's turn to the first question.
Test. Hi, the question I have is, after years of working in reentry programs, and Congressman Scott talking about all of these certifications that they can get while they're incarcerated, all of the certifications, training, credit hours that they get, mean absolutely nothing when they have to check that box every time they apply for a job. So what is being done as far as that systematic racism portion, as far as giving those opportunities and genuine reform for convicts?
So it sounds like your question was individuals who have prior felonies have to check the box. Was that your question? So the question is about what options are there for individuals who
My question is as far as felonies have to check the box on every application. And that obstacle as far as them being able to find competitive living wages, helping to have that career opportunity so they can have the housing, they can have the transportation, all of those things that cause the mental health problems and the stress and anxieties that we deal with in that part of the community. So what is being done as simply as if we're going to do genuine reform, why can't we take that part off applications?
The question, the solution generally recommended is to eliminate that box so that questions about your record only apply later in the interview process. The idea being that if you check the box, your application is going straight into the trash, whereas if you get an opportunity to make your case, they can say, well, okay, they had a little trouble 20 years ago, but you're the best one that we've had. I've interviewed 20 people, and you're head and shoulders above everybody else, you got the job. Never would have had that opportunity if you'd had to check the box. There is some controversy as to how effective that is, but that's one solution. The other is to take advantage of the educational opportunities while you're in prison, so when you come out, you've got more qualifications so that you can be qualified for more opportunities. But all of the evidence shows that after 7 years of no problem, that your likelihood of committing a crime is about the same as the general public. And so we have to instruct employers to intelligently consider what the record may be if they notice a record. But if it's more than 7 years, you might not want to give much credence to it. And you might want to look and see whether it's relevant to the job. If you got a child molestation charge, you might not want to be working in a daycare center. If you got a fraud charge, that might affect you working at a bank. But for a lot of others, whatever the charge was had nothing to do with whether you can do a particular job. And hopefully we can help employers intelligently get through that. We have a lot of jobs that are not filled that we can fill, but for those records. And a lot of the records, we're trying to get better at it. A lot of them, where they just round up people, get them convicted while they're young, some even as adults. And frankly, I believe that some of this was political in nature. More people you can get convicted of a felony, the fewer people you got to look at as potential voters. And I think we've gotten away from that, but too many people have records today.
And I would just like to, piggyback and say, my response to this question, yes, we can, knock on our legislators' door and get them to, ban the box legislation. But I also feel like there's some responsibility on we the people. And so, with our churches across these communities that host these job fairs, these corporations and employers like to come and check off the box that they've been socially responsible with their recruitment. We'll make sure part of their recruitment is that they're hiring formerly incarcerated people in our communities. And that goes not only for churches, but also with our sorority and fraternities as well. So it's up to us to go to some of these employers too to make sure that they are hiring formerly incarcerated people too.
And I think too that many of the employers need to be educated, and I think that's where we need to come in as well, educate individuals and let them know that when, and the research tells us that, when there is the opportunity for advancement in terms of education and employment after incarceration, the rates of recidivism do decrease. So it does work, but what happens is that when the person is released from prison and they are then faced with that stigma of being an ex-offender, then they have to renegotiate. We call that the process of renegotiating and shift really their own identity. What does that do? That whittles away with that self-esteem. That whittles away the idea that I can now provide for myself and my family. And so it's doing something to that individual. We're really, in many ways, we're not only dismantling the family structure, but we're dismantling their worth. And that's an issue that we have to face as well. We've got to shift that narrative to know that for many, that second chance means everything, because it's going to then connect to the life chances of their children and their grandchildren. Because we're dealing now also with the graying population. We've got a population of aged in prisons.
Yes, we do.
And so there's a lot there too.
And to piggyback on her, there was a vote on a bill for higher education in prisons in Virginia that I testified for the beginning of the year. And there was a lobby day through an organization, and basically it was spiritual leaders, and it was held at one of the churches that's downtown Richmond. And when I went to the church to see all these advocates and people that were going to be advocating up on the hill, the majority of the people that I saw were white people. And I'm not saying that we need them as allies in this work, but where are our black ministers in this criminal justice space and advocating for education in our prisons and the various other things as well?
There's one other strategy we haven't made much progress on it, and that was through the EEOC, finding a disproportionate impact on African Americans. When you have that policy, when there's no rational basis, if there is no difference in performance on the job, why are you looking at criminal records that have a discriminatory effect? We had a couple of rulings that ended up in the EEOC, but once you switched administrations, that went out the window. But that's another thing we need to pursue.
Now that the person in the highest office in our country has a felony conviction, maybe there'll be more conversations about manning the box. Okay. Mimi.
Okay. So throughout this presentation, we've heard a lot about programming, but I kind of was interested in, are we doing anything about the overall environment of our jails and prisons? To my understanding, it's very dirty. The deputies are not always respectful, and you're throwing people in cells, no privacy, no nothing, and you expect them to integrate into the world and then think everything is fine. I just want to know, like, are we doing anything about that? Whether it be more trainings on the deputies, are we going to focus on making it more humanizing? Like, I know in Sweden, their incarcerated population live in like apartments, like what you'd call a normal life. So I just wanted to know, are we taking steps towards that, as well as banning the box, all these programs helping the youth?
I can just speak from previously with my work as state campaigns manager for the ACLU of Virginia. I know at that particular time they had a particular strategic plan, and one of the things that they couldn't address at the time was prison conditions. But I would suggest that organizations such as the ACLU should be doing that work. But again, that's something that we can collectively as a group. And again, it's not something that in our communities we typically advocated for. But I would suggest, like, the social justice ministries within the church to take on that and then organize other social justice ministries across Virginia and go knock on, legislators' doors to try to get legislation. One of the things too that I'm learning is oftentimes, and I'm not talking about you, Congressman Scott, of course not, but sometimes our state legislators don't even understand the full scope of what's going on. And so it does take constituents on the ground or nonprofits to go into their offices, educate them about the problem, and then also they have to give language on a bill to help them orchestrate the language for it. So I don't know if that helps, but that's just what I know of conditions. And it does need major help here.
That's exactly the kind of thing that would make for a real nice study. Put one group in a humane situation, another in an inhumane situation, and then 5 years after they're out, figure out who was more likely to come back. And I think the import of your question was, if you treat people well, they're less likely to come back if you provide them with education and other opportunities. But that's the kind of thing that you ought to be able to document with a study. You don't have to go do a motion, just study it. And I think my guess is that you're right. If you treat people well, they're less likely to come back, and you'll be saving more money than you spend and have a safer community.
Ms. Jones, if I can phone a friend.
Sure.
Delegate Simons, what was the status of the prison ombudsman bill for DOC? Maybe Ms. Prati can help me on that too. There was no ombudsman for the Virginia Department of Corrections, and I know that there was a big push. I think it may have made it to the governor's desk to create an ombudsman, but I suspect the governor may have knifed it. But I want to, Ms. Prati has talked a little bit about the faith community, and the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy has been a real leader. My political career spans the end of the death penalty in Virginia. During my first campaign, I stood with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy because the last two people on death row in Virginia were both from Norfolk. And by the time I took office, the death penalty was no more because of the Interfaith Center and because of our legislators and because of who we put in office. It's not a partisan, not a party political event, but you got to pay attention to who your legislators are. But the Interfaith Center this year was able to get a bill to the governor's desk and get a bill signed to end the use of police dogs in prison, because we had some multiple of the number of dog bites per prisoner compared to the rest of the country. It was off the charts. It was so high. And it was a bill that was both excellent policy, and I guess people from both parties thought it was good politics to ban dogs biting people in prison. So they thanks to our legislators and with the signature of the governor, that happened. But it was priests and pastors and lay people who pushed it as a moral issue who did it. And my portfolio as a prosecutor is limited. It's don't put people in there who don't belong there. And don't overcrowd the situation so that the people who really need to be there can be the focus of the correctional officers. But we also, all of us, we have to be very mindful that at a time when the federal government is either paralyzed or being systematically demolished, that we have to rely on and with people like Congressman Scott, shouting stop the entire way as it's happening. But where we have to remember that we defend in depth our rights, and that we have our state legislators, folks like Delegate Simons, who have been ensuring that even as we slide backwards in Washington, that we have some protections in Richmond.
We need greater advocacy, certainly, in that area. I've done research and I've interviewed individuals, and we still see those inhumane conditions, mothers being shackled, for example, to their beds while they're giving birth. And so these are some of the issues when we talk about the inhumane treatment of prisoners. We need more advocacy. We tend to be, in some ways, a bit more reactive when we hear a story of someone who has died in a jail or someone who has committed suicide in that jail. But if we were more proactive, that would allow us to take a closer look at what those conditions truly are.
LPF was already
All right.
Well, that was pretty much it.
And final thought is, I say the churches and ministry, but also the universities. I mean, I know UVA, University of Richmond, Washington and Lee. Like, I was surprised to see Washington and Lee had students, law students, that were advocating for the, guys and women that were trying to get on parole. And so maybe tapping into some of the criminal, and one of the things I would love to see is some of our HBCUs on the front line with some of these issues.
Hi, I'm Delegate Simons. I just wanted to say that I had a meeting last week about the bill to ban shackling of women during pregnancy, and I also carried a bill to create a presumption of being out of jail for women who are pregnant. Both of those bills are now on the governor's desk, and we're expecting that he's probably going to veto those bills. And, during session this year, I voted for the prison ombudsman bill. I voted over the years for the ban the box bill, but we always have trouble when they get to a Republican governor's desk. So I would just say that's why elections matter.
Okay, good, thank you.
I served in the I'm hearing a lot of stuff that I was dealing with when I was in the state Senate. When I was in the House of Delegates, I offered a bill that would have created a prison visitation committee of legislators to visit prisons and come back and report so we get an idea of what's going on. And that lost by one vote in committee. And people have no idea how far we've come in the death penalty. When I was in the state Senate, I remember being on the short end of a 38-2 vote to expand the death penalty. There were only 2 of us. And then during my lifetime, we've repealed the death penalty, a priority of the NAACP for decades.
Okay, good. I'm also the political action chair for the Virginia NAACP, and we advocate for a lot of this, but legislative advocacy is definitely the answer to that, to the question we asked. But my question is going to be, we know what the challenges are, but can you talk about what the benefits of DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, being integrated into the criminal justice system, the benefits of it?
I don't mind taking that. So, how many people here know what a holler is? And I don't mean shouting. It is a mountain valley, a hollow in which people live. I know that because my wife is from Bland County, and her father was the chief diesel mechanic of the Bluestone Coal Company, UMWA. I was at Harvard Law School on November 4th of last year. And I was speaking to the College Democrats, the American Constitution Society, the Middle Eastern Students Association, and I said, how many people know what a selling party is? I got one hand. Diversity, equity, and inclusion in the criminal justice system is really essential, because if we aren't able to understand how people get into the justice system, if we aren't able to communicate, my wife is a rhetoric PhD. If we don't understand people's literacy, as they call it in the study of rhetoric, who they are, where they're from, how they understand, then we make bad decisions. We look stupid in front of juries. We misunderstand and mistreat victims. We overpunish defendants. who I am as an Iranian American and as, with my mother's family going back to Germany in the 1850s, like that informs how I understand the world. It doesn't make me incapable of understanding anything else. But I need people from all walks of life in my office as prosecutors and as victim advocates. We need police officers, probation officers, parole officers, batterers intervention instructors, substance abuse instructors who don't all look like clones and who don't all act like clones, because otherwise we are not effective. We are a country that is made up of a mosaic, and we need our justice system to be made up of a mosaic, to be effective and to have credibility and to make us safer.
If you don't notice diversity, you can't, lack of diversity or the disparate impact, you can't do anything about it. There's a business term, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so when you have, the most notorious disparity was the crack powder cocaine disparity, where for the same amount of crack, you get 5 years mandatory minimum, you get probation for powder. Crack, 95% African-American defendants, powder, about 70% white defendants. And there's no pharmacological difference or justification for that, and that disparity went on for decades. Studies have shown that at every step of the criminal justice system, African-Americans are adversely affected. More likely to be arrested, if arrested, more likely to be tried, if tried, more likely to be found guilty. If found guilty, more likely to be sentenced, and if sentenced, more likely to have a longer sentence. Now, if you don't notice the disparate impact, you can't try to figure out what's wrong with the system. So when you get rid of DEI, you get rid of counting and measuring, and so you can't manage the problem.
All right. Well, we are going to move on to our last portion. If you guys are really motivated about criminal justice reform, we highly recommend that you watch the movie called Kimba. And so we are going to play the trailer for you guys to check out now.
Taking you back to the beginning, before all this happened.
I wasn't even allowed to date until I was 18.
Come on, Kimba. I don't fit in.
By the time I got to Hampton, I couldn't wait to break free. I met Khalif. The world stopped.
So beautiful. Hey, Kemba, you should start thinking about picking a major. You should listen to your father, Kemba. I love you, Kemba.
I love you too.
It's nothing.
Dad, what are you doing here?
There are bounty hunters calling our house, looking for Khalif. They better not say nothing.
They wouldn't do anything like that.
You don't know what they would do. You don't understand. I know where they live, Kemba.
We don't want you. We want Khalif.
I don't know where he is.
If you cooperate, we can help you out.
You should listen to him.
I never dealt any drugs, but this says I did.
If you sign the plea deal, at most you'll serve 24 months.
By mandatory sentencing guideline, the defendant is to be committed for a term of 294 months.
Kemba didn't handle, use, or sell any of the drugs. They treated the girlfriend like the kingpin.
I want my daughter out of there, and I want her home.
She got caught up in the war on drugs. They denied the appeal.
It's a fight they want, it's a fight they're gonna get. These ladies will help raise awareness of the case.
This is my story, too. Keep your head up.
The president needs to release her now.
I don't want this to be the end of my story.
And
taking you back to the beginning, before all this happened.
Did you guys see the little clip of Congressman Scott in there? The guy playing Congressman Scott?
that's what I wanted to share.
Go right ahead.
No, yeah, so that was Congressman Scott in the film, and Kelly, the director of the movie and the person who played me, Nestor Cooper, actually flew out to Virginia to meet my parents and to meet with Congressman Scott. But I just really want to take the liberty right now to just personally thank you, Congressman Scott, for your dedication on sentencing reform, drug policy, and you've been doing this for decades. And it's bigger than just me. I'm grateful to my parents who stayed in your office this year. And, again, thank you to Joni Ivy, and also there was someone else in your office, Dillard, Bobby Vassar, and Larry Dillard. I'm just so very grateful for your leadership and the people that have come up underneath your office and how you have embraced myself and the issue, more importantly. But I know that you were a champion for myself getting a pardon, Michelle West getting a pardon, and Don Scott as well. So I just really thank you for your commitment. And for those of you all, the film is streaming on BT Plus now, but there's a character in the film. And with the film, it wasn't just about me sharing my story. It's about, again, other people's stories and getting people to understand how one will get caught up in the system. But one of the characters in the film, her name is Michelle West. She had been in prison for over 32 years, and I told the writer when I did the film that I had to have her character in the film. And we launched an impact campaign to go along with it, did over 130 screenings across the country. The 400 Years African American History Commission, which is a federal commission, worked with Congressman Scott's office, and we had a screening at the Capitol in DC last year. But again, just thank you for all of your support. And there were other organizations and many different people, but Michelle West eventually got her sentence commuted the day before President Biden went out of office. But everyone doesn't have a Congressman Scott. Everyone doesn't have parents like mine. And just like what was said earlier, they shouldn't have to. And we have to continue, we the people, to push reform and to humanize people.
Could I say one thing too? We got Kemba out. A lot of people who benefit from that kind of effort, you never see them again. Kemba, from that day, has dedicated herself to make sure that what happened to her doesn't happen to others. And so thank you, Kemba, for dedicating your life to try to help others.
Will you please join me in giving a round of applause to our amazing panel tonight? And we are so grateful to Ivy Baptist Church and the Social Justice Ministry for co-collabing. I'm going to have Reverend Callie close us out.
Hey, thank you all so much. Can you please join me in another hand for our moderator, Ms. Shannon Jones, and for all of our panelists for helping to expand our knowledge this evening. Please also just allow me a few moments. I promise I won't be before you long. I know you're in the church and you heard a Baptist preacher say that before, but I promise. Just a few remarks to please join me in thanking our Ivy staff who came here on an Easter Monday on their day off to help us in our audio and our visuals and our setup. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Ivy team. Also want to thank, again, Ms. Jennifer Brooks for joining in with the Ivy Social Justice Ministry. Thank you so much to the NAACP chapter. And of course, for everyone that has played a role in bringing this together. And then can you all give yourselves a hand for being here on a Monday evening? You could have been relaxing anywhere and just enjoying your time, but we are so grateful that you all took the time to come and hear this very important conversation. As it was stated, I do serve as one of the associate ministers here at Ivy, and I do chair our social justice ministry, and I'm so grateful to our pastor who gave us the green light to lead such a ministry in such a time as this. And so our ministry is in place to do three things: educate, empower, engage. We educate our members on the issues that are happening on the local, state, and federal level. We had a group of members. We went to Richmond during the General Assembly session, and we want to thank, of course, our very own Delegate Shelley Simons, who actually met with us and helped to expand our knowledge on how we can influence policy. We can show up to Richmond to testify, to speak in favor for or against policy or legislation that is going to probably most likely have an impact on our community. So if you want to partner and join with us, our Ivy Social Justice Ministry, please see me afterwards. Our co-chair, Reese Brinkley, if you would please raise your hand. He's in the back there. And all of our social justice members, could you wave your hands, please? Volunteers, thank you so much. If you see them, if you want to partner with us, we're happy to partner with you all in the community here. Again, thank you to all of the elected officials that are here. I want to make sure that you all understand that my charge to you is don't leave here without making a commitment. You have heard what our panelists have shared, and now is the opportunity for us to act. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The time that we are living in calls for our courage, not our comfort, and not our complacency. And so with that, thank you. Because there's a lot happening in our communities, there's a lot happening to us, and we shouldn't be in that mindset that we have to wait for something to happen to us to act. If it's happening to you, it's happening to me. And so there's enough work to be done. I see a lot of community leaders here that you can join in with. So there are a lot of resources in this room. I see some union leaders out here. I see some other grassroots organizations. Join the NAACP, Hampton chapter, Newport News chapter. We got members from Norfolk and Hampton Roads here to help you get connected. And so if you're here representing an organization or grassroots organization, can you wave your hand so people can find you and connect with you? Look at all these hands. Y'all look around. Yes, please connect with them. Get some cards. If you, again, want to serve as a mentor, we have some young people in the room who want to be involved. And so we just really believe in being connected and coming together collectively as a community. The scripture says, faith without works is what? Y'all know the Bible. Thank you. Amen. Faith without works is dead. So with that being said, let us come together. Let's do this work together. Let's make sure that we're engaging our leaders here and making sure that we partner with them and find the area that fits you. We're not asking you to do something that's outside of your scope of practice, but do something. Please don't leave here without making a commitment. Is there anything that I left out, Ms. Joni, Gigi? The movie. We want to remind you that the movie is coming. We're going to bring that back. Keep, eyes out on details. Stay tuned. But we are going to do a film screening to show that movie. Also was asked that I make the announcement. Please get your real ID. 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 With that being said, I'm going to close out. Again, thank you. We are so grateful that you all came out this evening, and we hope that you will stay tuned and continue to partner with us. If you did not get to ask your question, I'm so sorry. Please stay tuned, and please come up and engage our panelists as well as our elected officials that are here so you can connect with them. I would like to do a group picture with the panelists and then with the elected officials, and then I promise y'all can engage them. With that being said, I'm going to step out the way. Shannon, you can officially close.
God bless you all. Thank you, and good night.